Welcome back. We continue our discussion of logic. If I could remind you, apologize for the slant on the board, but hey, at least it's slanting up. Logic is the science and art of proper reasoning. As a science, in logic, we study the theory of proper reasoning. We study what we're doing right here is, the bulk of it is the science of proper reasoning. The art, as an art, we examine how arguments are used in an argument, in a discussion, in a discourse, and so on. So, as a science, we study how arguments work. And that's what we're discussing right now. The syllogism is the formal statement of an argument. It's not the way you would argue, certainly not in rhetoric, certainly not in real life. These are not real life arguments. The reason that we use syllogisms is to give students a way of examining and evaluating arguments so that they can determine which arguments are valid, which are invalid. And by formalizing these arguments, we are then able to see what makes an argument valid, what makes it invalid. You also have the ability, if you're looking at an argument and thinking, this just doesn't ring true, it doesn't sound right to me, it gives you a way of breaking that argument down to further examine it and look for fallacies and so on. A syllogism is a logical argument that has 3 terms, 2 premises, and a conclusion. Syllogisms are either valid or invalid. They are deductive reasoning. Remember yesterday, or in our last lecture, which I recorded yesterday, by the way, but our last lecture, we said that the term is the mental act of apprehension. It's the verbal expression of the mental apprehension. The statement is the verbal expression of a judgment. An argument is a verbal expression of inference. So the syllogism is a verbal expression of a deductive inference. In deductive logic, validity is the key concept. So we're not concerned so much with truth as we are with validity. And that might sound strange to you. We're Christians. We're supposed to be primarily concerned with truth. But in argument, we're also concerned with how we get to the truth. Because if we, Christ taught us that we had to come through the front door, not over the gate or through a window. And the same thing when it comes to an argument, we have to come at the truth the right way. Now, there is a way to abuse people's logic, abuse their rationale, abuse their reason with our truth. And that's what we want to avoid. So we have to come to the truth the right way. And that's what validity is about. Validity is not the same as truth. The syllogism is valid if the conclusion is implied by the premises. So let's put that up on the board. Put another way, in a valid syllogism, two true premises must necessarily be followed by a true conclusion. Okay, now I'm going to give you three ways of thinking about validity. Okay, so again, a syllogism is valid if the conclusion is implied by the premises. Sometimes that can be hard to tell, though, because you look at it and on the surface it appears that the conclusion is implied by the premises. So let's say this way. In a valid syllogism, two true premises must necessarily be followed by a true conclusion. That must necessarily is an essential point to make. Okay, because, and I'm going to put this up on the board as well. If it is possible for two true premises to be followed by a false conclusion, the syllogism is invalid. If it is possible for two true premises to be followed by a false conclusion, the syllogism is valid. The reason is because given the truth of the premises, a false conclusion is not implied by the premises. Because two true premises really, and this is, you know, we could take some time to look at Venn diagrams, but the conclusion is contained in the premises. Venn diagrams are, in our logic class in 8th grade, we use them, but they're kind of a bonus round. What they do is they illustrate the fact that the conclusion is contained in the premises, so that the conclusion doesn't have to be stated necessarily, because the premises only leave that option. So a conclusion is invalid if it goes beyond the premises. The conclusion can only state what is in the premises. I think that the rules for validity, the rules for valid syllogisms, will help with illustrating, and I may stick a Venn diagram up there. We'll see. Now, we have these three ways of thinking about validity. Again, a syllogism is valid if the conclusion is implied by the premises. Related to that, I said that in a valid syllogism, the conclusion is contained in the premises. That's essentially what we're saying right here. So in a valid syllogism, two true premises must necessarily be followed by a true conclusion. There's no other option in a valid syllogism. If it is possible to have a false conclusion with those two true premises, then your syllogism is invalid. We need to keep that in mind here. We're going to talk about methods for determining when a syllogism or an argument is invalid. Now, again, the reason that we study this the way that we do, the reason we write these syllogisms and so on, I'll take away the slant here. But the reason that we examine them is in our logic class, we want our students to learn how to evaluate for validity. We want them to learn what a valid syllogism looks like and what an invalid syllogism looks like. So, I'm going to have to, first of all, I'm going to take the square of opposition and show you a few things from that. We'll put that right here this time. Hopefully this is not in the way, but just in case, I'll move it out of the way. Here's the square of opposition. So we have the A statement, the E statement, the I statement, and the O statement. The A statement is all S is P. E statement, no S is P. I statement, sum S is P, and the O statement, sum S is not P. Okay, now, we have those four statements. All syllogisms we'll use, remember, all statements, every statement that can be made, fit into these four categorical statements, is what we call them. So a syllogism is going to be made up of a combination of A, E, I, and O statements with a third term. Remember our definition of a syllogism by the numbers: 3 terms, 2 premises, 1 conclusion. All right, so we have the 3 terms are S, P, and M. S is the subject term. It is the subject of the conclusion. P is the predicate of the conclusion. And M is the middle term. It is the term found in both premises, but not the conclusion. Okay, so those are the 3 terms. Then we have 2 premises and a conclusion. All right, so we just for the sake of illustration, we use what we call a schema. All right, here is a form of syllogism, an AAA1 syllogism. If we use the schema, we're going to get all S is P. In the conclusion, the S and P are always in this order. S first, then P, because again, S is the subject of the conclusion, P is the predicate of the conclusion, and then we have to figure out where the middle term goes. Now, this is where if you were in 8th grade logic, we would take some time to teach you how to do this, but for right now, I'm just going to put it up here on the board so you can see it. All 3 statements in this syllogism are A statements. All S is P. So we have an all. And this is a figure 1. So it is going to be all M is P, all S is M. Because the predicate goes in the major premise, and the subject goes in the minor premise. Okay, so we have all M is P, all S is M, all S is P. Okay? Now, I'm going to erase these definitions here, and we'll assign something meaningful to S, P, and M. Let's see. S will be beagles. P will be dogs, and M will be, let's see, let's make it canines. All right, so if we take this schema here, everywhere that we see an M will be canines. We have all, therefore, all S is P, so all beagles are dogs. Can you see that? I hope you can see it. If I can move this out of the way so you can. Okay, and then we have all canines are dogs. all beagles are canines. Okay, so all canines are dogs, all beagles are canines, therefore all beagles are dogs. That's the AAA1 syllogism. All right, so does it look valid to you? All canines are dogs, all beagles are canines, therefore all beagles are dogs. You might recognize the A equals B, C equals A. Let's see. A equals B, C equals A, therefore C equals B. That kind of thing. It's arranged a little differently, but if A equals B and C equals A, then that means that C equals B. And mathematically, you can work it out in your brain on that. Okay? There are a couple of ways to test this. One way to test it is by counterexample. Now in logic, we'll just take this form, AAA1, and we'll write a counterexample. Remember, for a counterexample, if it is possible to have true premises followed by a false conclusion, then your syllogism is invalid. So what we'll do in our logic class is we'll take all blank is blank. That's our conclusion. All right, so and all. We will write an obviously false conclusion. Okay? Let's see. All dogs are beagles. So we just switched the order there. That's false. All dogs are beagles. Sorry about the is. It's for the English obsessors. I'll change that. All dogs are beagles. And then we fill in the middle term. We're going to leave blank. And we need a middle term that will be true. All of them are beagles and all dogs are them. Okay? And we're not going to find one in this case because this is a valid syllogism. The other way that we can test for validity on these is by rules. And just a quick test, I'm just going to do this in my head real quick. Yeah. So this is a valid syllogism here. If it's valid, you won't be able to find a counterexample. Okay, so let's change it real quick. I showed you a valid one. Let me show you one that is invalid. We'll make this an AAA2. AAA2. All right, so here it's going to be all P is M, all S is M, therefore all S is P. All right, we'll use the same beagles, dogs, and canines as we did before. So we have all beagles are canines. All beagles, sorry, it's not canines. All beagles are dogs. All beagles are canines. All dogs are canines. Okay, so here's your syllogism this time. All dogs are canines, all beagles are canines, therefore all beagles are dogs. Again, does it look valid to you or invalid? Well, part of what's confusing with this is that all three of the statements are true. This is true, all dogs are canines. This is true, all beagles are canines. This conclusion is true, therefore all beagles are dogs. Okay, but I'm going to show you that in this case, we've come at our argument the wrong way because there's no connection between these two premises. The fact that all dogs are canines is unrelated to the fact that all beagles are canines. Now, I know you're saying, well, beagles are dogs, and that's true, but we're only looking at the argument itself. And within this argument itself, there's no connection made between these two. By the way, as a rhetoric student, you need to understand this. You can't assume that your audience is making all the connections that you are in your mind or that you believe are there. They have to be there. In an argument, you've got to lay out your case and lay it out soundly. And this is a part of understanding how this is done, okay? So in this case, what we want to do to test this is to test it by counterexample. The way to test by counterexample is, again, to come up with a conclusion that is obviously false. And then if it's possible for us to have two true premises, we have a syllogism that is invalid. Okay? So, let's change one term here. No. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I got to think about this for a second. Sorry. Okay, yeah, that'll work. Okay. You just got treated to Pastor Melanek having a brain cramp for a second. Okay, so this is true. All poodles are canines. This premise is true. All beagles are canines. Following the form then, we would say, therefore, all beagles are poodles. That's false, and obviously false. So again, this is an invalid form of syllogism because when two true premises can possibly be followed by a false conclusion, then the syllogism is invalid. Now, validity is determined solely by the form of the syllogism. When you're dealing with syllogisms, this is the formality of it, and this is where you have the ability to examine different styles, different forms of arguments. The form of the argument says whether or not the argument is valid or not. Now, there are many different ways of stating these forms. In logic, essentially, if you take the four kinds of statements, A, E, I, and O statements, there are four forms or four positions that the middle term can take. It can be here or here, here or here. So, remember in a syllogism you have two premises and a conclusion, so three statements. You have four positions that the middle term can be. So you have these three, you have 4 options for this, 4 options for this, 4 options for this, and 4 options for this, and you math majors can multiply 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 and figure out that there are 256 forms of syllogisms, of which only 24 of those forms are valid forms of syllogisms. And there's some debate about some of those forms of syllogisms, but I'm not going to bore you with all the details of what logicians debate, because I'm sure you'd be thrilled to know that the big debate when it comes to the valid forms of syllogisms, the big debate is, to everyone's excitement and amusement, a debate over the existential presupposition. Now, you don't need to know what that is. You can just tell your friends about the existential presupposition and they'll all be impressed with you. But nonetheless, there is some argument over whether assuming that something is actually there counts as validity. And I'll leave it at that. Now, in rhetoric, we aim for rhetorically effective counterexamples. So we want a counterexample that will illustrate to our audience that the form of that argument was invalid. And we'll illustrate it in a way that will make everyone gasp or laugh or something like that.